We are going to go ahead and do the measurements from the form today because that's a little bit easier to do than from the body. Again, you guys, we talked about this last week. You guys have these printouts for the measurements that you need to draft a basic sloper. So you have these to print. These are the ones you're going to kind of write on while you measure later on in the semester. This is what I'm going to doodle my measurements on. In the book, and you guys have the book hopefully now, and if not, you have the printouts also. You have all of the information to assist you. In the new book, it's page 34. In the older book, I know it's in the 20s, so it's a little bit before that. But it is still chapter 2, and it's all about the measurements. So if you get to a point where you're taking measurements later in the semester for your sloper, and you just, you can't remember what is, let's say, bust span. If you go ahead and you look, they're all labeled here. Bust span is number 10. It gives you a definition of where it is, and then you can also look for the number 10, so you can kind of look for number 10, and then you can see where it locates it, on the actual dress form for you. Really similar to doing it on a person or on a model, but this is just a little bit easier because it's definitely more standardized. There's also, and I printed this out for you too, you have this as a printout, there's also a standard measurement chart. So when you guys are measuring from a form, if you want to always kind of have this out also, just to kind of double check what you're doing, sometimes you'll get a really weird measurement and it kind of just seems off. And so you can always go to, I'm doing a size 8, you can go to the size 8 standard measurements and you can see, I don't know, let's say like my strap. Ooh, my strap was 28. That seemed kind of big. And if I look at the strap for a size 8, theirs would be, see if I can find it quickly. And I can't find it quickly. Sorry, not looking at it like this. I can't. Theirs is a 17 3/8. So that's kind of nice if you get something weird like that where you can go and you can check and it's just nice to have it there. And again, this really only works for forms. All forms are not the same, so it's something that I'll mention right now. This is a PGM form. This form looks a lot different than some of the other forms that we have. Even a PGM lingerie form, which has a crotch and legs. Those ones are just a little bit more petite, not as shapely. The wolf forms don't have a hip area or a butt area like this form does either. So depending on what kind of form you're using, that's going to be different too. So what I always like to do is I always like to look, see what kind of a form it is, and then I kind of just jot that down on my sheet. So we're just going to get started. Again, hopefully you guys can follow along. If you have your printouts, that makes it easier. I'm going to go ahead and open up to the printouts that I gave you for assisting on finding the measurements. So I have those there, kind of in the background, ready to go. And I'm just going to start drafting here. So the first thing we're looking for is the full length. And again, if you go to number 6, you find it in the book, and you will see that it's a vertical measurement. And the full length is described as waist to shoulder at neck, parallel to center lines. So they want us to go waist to shoulder at neck. So I'm going to go from the waist, which is great because there's tape, to the shoulder, and it's great because this actually has a little pin in it. So that's great, the shoulder at the neck. And they want me to stay parallel to the center front line. Now, again, I like to start measuring from the 1-inch line, not from the end of the metal, because I'm not sure if maybe they messed up and, maybe they put it on incorrectly. So I'm going to measure from a line that I can see for sure. And then I'm going to measure from the middle of the tape, because that's essentially the middle of the form. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep my line parallel. So I'm just going to scooch over just a tad. And my full length looks like it is, making sure that's centered, it looks like it is 17 1/8. So I'm going to mark that down as 17 1/8, 1/8 of an inch. You really do want to get pretty accurate. I would say that 1/8 would be sufficient. So if you're in between, maybe let's say 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch and 3/4, go ahead and go 5/8. If you're in between 1/4 and 1/2, go ahead and do 3/8. So definitely keep it on the 8ths. You don't necessarily have to go to the 16ths, but if you want to, you definitely can. Okay, I want to do the across the shoulder. So again, I'm going to look for across the shoulder. It tells me right here that it is number 5, so I'm going to look for number 5. And, 14, I'm sorry, not 5, 14. And it's the shoulder tip to the center front across the neck. So shoulder tip to the center front neck, okay? So they kind of spell them out for you, but I know that sometimes it is a little bit confusing. So shoulder tip. What I've done too is I've placed a pinhead on my shoulder tip. Remember in the chapter before this, it gives us those locations where we want to have pinheads. The shoulder tip is definitely one of those areas. So I'm going to go center front neck to shoulder tip. I'm looking at 7.5 on the dot. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my center front length, number 5. Again, you can kind of look up the numbers, and that's really helpful. That's a vertical measurement going this way, so I can come over here, and I see that number 5 tells me that it's measuring the neck mark to the waist over the bridge. So my neck mark, there's a little pin here, and then to the waist, right in the center, and there's another pin there, the beauty of a dress form. And it says to go over the bridge. So what they mean is they want you to go over this area here. Remember, we put a bridge over the bust span. Again, that came from the beginning of the chapter, and it's because you don't want to divot into that bust area. You don't want to measure inside. You want to make sure that you give it that extra space for room for it to breathe. So that's important. That remember, this tape that goes across the bust, pinheads in certain areas and certain locations, you want to make sure you're marking all of those. We'll go over dress forms as we get closer to the end of the semester. So we'll figure out how everyone's going to get their forms. So I have 14, and I'm going to say 14 3/8. Okay. And remember, I know it might be a little confusing because I'm subtracting an inch, but again, I'm subtracting an inch because I'm not measuring all the way to the end of the metal. Okay, now I'm doing the bust arc, and again, number 17, I kind of know that arc goes around the body, so I'm going to look for that horizontal measurement. So if I look for 17, it tells me the bust arc is center front over the bust point, so over the bust point, so center front over the bust point, ending 2 inches below the arm plate at the side seam. Okay, so there's a lot of information there. So they want me to go center front over the bust point, so from here on my marking, over the bust point, ending 2 inches below the arm plate at the side seam. So lots of info in there. And again, you're going to need to have this kind of bust span already marked, that bridge already marked for you. I have a nice blue mark in the middle of the form, so I know exactly where the center is. I'm going to go ahead and line this up again, making sure that I'm going 2 inches below the arm plate onto the side seam, and so I'm at 9 1/8. Okay, 9 1/8 inch. I'm going to turn her sideways so that you can see. Right now we have this arm plate, it's metal, and below it I have marked the armhole depth that they give me in the chart. And so remember on page 31, there's a chart that gives you the armhole depths. We went over that last week. It's different depending on the size form or person that you're using, and that's so that you don't have it really tight under the armpit. Then, again, I put my bridge 2 inches below this plate so that I know where I'm measuring to for certain measurements like my bust span. Okay? My bust arc. Something that you want to remember with arcs is arcs I try to think of like the McDonald's arc. They're kind of curvy, like the M shape. And so you're going to have arcs around the bust area, you're going to have arcs around the waist area, and then you're going to have arcs around the hip area. So I try to kind of keep that McDonald's arch in my mind when I'm measuring arcs out, or curvy. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next figure, dart placement, number 20. And again, I kind of know that that one's going to be a horizontal measurement. So I'm going to go look, and I see number 20 here, and it tells me that the dart placement is the center front to the side front, or the princess line. So center front to the side front, or princess line. Now I know that this is the princess line here because it's the actual seamed princess line. On a person, that's a little bit more difficult to find. So what we typically do for dart placement is we take this waist arc and then we find the center of it, and that's where we place the dart. And then we can manipulate it and move it around according to the person. And that's why when you're building a sloper, it's not set in stone on paper. You need to do fittings afterwards. So again, if you go through the book, you'll kind of see that on a person, it's a little more difficult because we don't have these lines kind of drawn onto our body. So I'm going to take that dart placement and I'm going to measure from center front to the princess line. So I'm looking at 3 inches spot on. Those are kind of nice, simple measurements. I'm going to look for my shoulder slope now, my number 7. So that one is kind of a mix of a horizontal and vertical because it's on an angle. So I'm going to go to my vertical measurements and I'm going to look for my shoulder slope, number 7. It's the center line at waist to shoulder tip mark. So center line at waist to shoulder tip mark. And again, really important that you mark these little pins, all these little pin heads and markings before we start measuring the form, because you're going to use them. So again, this is my shoulder length here, my shoulder slope, shoulder slope, misspoke. And it's going to go from my center at the waist, and it's going to go over the bust. You can kind of see it kind of arching over the bust, and it's going to land right there on the shoulder tip. And I'm looking at 18, so 17 spot on, 17 for that shoulder slope. That one's kind of a unique one, but it's really important that you get it, because that's actually how we're going to draw the very, very tip to the center front of the sloper. We need that line for our L square. So that's an important one. If you want to double check, you can double check that one to your standard measurement to make sure that you're getting it over that curvature of the bust. Okay, now we're going to do our bust depth. That one again is number 9, and I kind of know that one, because it's talking about depth, it's meaning this vertical measurement. So I'm going to go vertical, and I'm going to go to my bust depth, which is, number 9, and it is my shoulder tip to my bust point. So my shoulder tip to my bust point. Now, what they mean is they mean bust point, shoulder tip, and it's a diagonal line, or a slanted line. So that one, again, it's kind of a mix of the two, but when you're talking about depth, they're meaning kind of how deep, so how, shallow or deep on the body. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my shoulder tip to my bust point, and I'm looking at 9 1/4. So 9 1/4. Okay, and now I'm doing my shoulder length, number 13. And because I kind of know that my lengths are going a certain direction, I'm going to go for my vertical measurements. And my shoulder length is, if I can find it, up here. It's the shoulder tip here to the neck edge. So I'm going to go ahead and get that, and it's a sloping measurement, so it's kind of in between, it's kind of a diagonal line. So I'm going to go my shoulder tip to my neck measurement. And again, I have my shoulder tip already marked, and then my neck measurement, there's already a pin placed on the dress form. So I'm looking at 5 spot on. Okay. Notice that when I measure this, because I'm working on this side of the form, I'm measuring everything on her left side. So the idea is that, again, when you use a dress form, everything should be symmetrical. And then these are like perfect ratio figures. So try to keep it consistent. When you measure your fronts, do it on the left side. When you do your back, do it on the left side. So just try to keep it consistent on one side. And then the idea, again, is that when we make our sloper, we're doing everything half of it. So we're going to mirror it anyways and come out with a really symmetrical pattern. That's, again, not how humans work. We're not always totally symmetrical from left to right, but again, you would fit this, and you would definitely have fittings once you're working on your working patterns too. So something to keep in mind. Okay, I'm done with my first page. I'm going to move on to my second page. And now I'm going to work with the strap. The strap's a little bit confusing. Strap is number 8. So I'm going to find my strap, which is kind of one of those ones that's in the middle of vertical and horizontal. So it's at the very, very bottom of your printout there, very, very bottom. It's kind of like a diagonal measurement. And the strap here is, you want to place the metal tip of your measuring tape, and I'm not going to place the metal tip, but I'm going to place that 1-inch mark. So place the tip of your measuring tape at the corner of the shoulder and neck. So at the corner of the shoulder and the neck, so this area here, to the bottom of the waistband at the side seam. So it's kind of a weird one where you're going to put it here and it's going to go across here. So it's kind of a weird measurement. You'll see in the printout that it kind of avoids the bust area. So I'm going to measure here, and I'm going to kind of just go as smooth as I can across and down here, not forcing it to go in an odd angle over the bust. I don't need to. It doesn't naturally want to do that. So I'm just going to take it, again, they're telling me take the metal tip, but I'm going to take the 1-inch mark. And I'm going to go from the neck, shoulder, across, essentially, as comfortable as it feels, till I get to the side at the waist. And I'm pretty much spot on at 17 1/2. So 17 1/2 for my strap. That's another one that's a little strange. So if you want to double check that one with the book, with those standard measurements on page page 36 of the new text. You can go ahead and do that and kind of compare. Okay, my side length is going to be a length, so it's kind of going to be a long one, and that's number 11. So my side length is listed as, sorry, finding it. So the pin mark below the arm plate, so I'm going to rotate this for you. So the pin mark below the arm plate, which I marked again based off of that little chart on page 31. So I marked it for my size 8 dress form 1/2 inch down from the middle arm plate. So from that pin mark below the arm plate to the side seam, to the waist, I'm sorry, on the side. So I'm going to go from this pin mark to the waist on the side. And that's going to give us the side measurement, which is again really important because that's an actual part of the sloper that we're so used to seeing. So we really want that one to be accurate. You don't want to take it all the way to the arm plate either, because then you're going to be making it so that it's too tight under the armpit. Not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that down. And I'm looking at, I'm just going to go 8. I'm going to go 8 spot on. Make it easy. And again, we can adjust this afterwards. Okay, then they're looking for the bust span, number 10. And a span, again, is another thing that you can kind of think goes around the body. It spans around like this. Think about spanning around the globe. So my number 10, my bust span, it says to place the tape across the bust points. So bust point to bust point. Divided in half for that measurement. So they're telling me that the span essentially is from this part over, but what they want you to do is they want you to take the measurement, instead of from the middle and kind of moving, they just want you to take the measurement between bust points. And so I'm looking at 7 spot on, and then they want me to divide that by 2. So 3.5 would be my bust span. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Now what they want me to do is they want me to do the across the chest, and then I can kind of think of that as an across measurement also. That's number 15, so let's see if I can find 15. It is defined as the center front, so center front, to the mid-armhole level. It's a pinhead mark. So again, this is a dress form. It's nice and easy, lots of marks. There's a pin, there's a screw right here in the middle of the armhole. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna measure to that location, but not all the way into the arm. So I'm essentially just trying to get the across the chest, just the widest part of the chest, not the shoulder, not the bust, but the actual chest part of you. Okay, so this area. So again, I'm going to go from the center front to this location, but I'm not going to go over onto the arm, because that would mean on a human, I would be measuring over into their armpit, which we don't want. That's part of the sleeve. Okay? Hopefully that's not a confusing one. It does tend to confuse some people. And again, you're just trying to really keep it really perpendicular to the center line. So keep that in mind as well. I'm gonna go a little higher. I'm a little too low. I'm really trying to do it off of that pin. And so I'm looking at, I'm gonna go with 6 3/8. 6 3/8. Okay, now you're essentially done with the front measurements. So it's not that many measurements. It's 2 pages for the fronts and 2 pages for the back. I did not print out the skirt fronts or the skirt backs. It's another 2 pages each. And I didn't print out the sleeve. And the reason why I didn't do that again is because this is solely for you to kind of be able to see, what is that little sloper that you have in your hand? What is it for? How do you find it? And again, I want you to understand these key points. I want you to know bust point. I want you to know what center front is. I want you to know, shoulder tip. So these are important areas that, again, as we draft and we manipulate the darts in the first section of the semester, you can now reference those areas a little bit better because now you're seeing it on the form. So I'm going to do another video and we're going to go ahead and just go over the back of the form. So I'm going to switch sides.